Did you know that 85% of your professional success has nothing to do with your technical knowledge? Hello, friends, and welcome back. I'm glad you're here. I want you to take a deep breath. I want you to unplug from the noise of the news cycle, the notifications pinging on your phone, and the endless scroll of social media. For the next little while, I want us to go on a journey inward. We are going to explore the single most complex, volatile, and rewarding machinery in the known universe. I'm not talking about artificial intelligence, and I'm not talking about quantum computing. I'm talking about the human being sitting across from you at the dinner table. I'm talking about the boss who drives you crazy, the client who won't sign the deal, and the reflection you see in the mirror every morning. Today, we are diving into a text that is often misunderstood. It's a book that sits on millions of shelves, sometimes gathering dust, sometimes viewed as a relic of a bygone era. I'm talking, of course, about Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. But, and this is a big but, we are not looking at this as a collection of cheap parlor tricks to manipulate people. We are looking at this through the lens of a recent, profound re-examination of the text, specifically the Vietnamese edition known as Dac Nan Tom, which reframes these concepts not as tactics, but as a philosophy of the heart. We are going to break down the first massive chunk of this wisdom, covering the foundational arguments, the science of criticism, and the desperate, gnawing hunger for appreciation. And I promise you, by the end of this episode, you are going to look at your interactions with other human beings in a completely different light. Let's start with a number. 85. Keep that number in your head. We live in a world that is obsessed with technical proficiency. We spend years in university learning how to code, how to calculate load-bearing walls, how to interpret tax law, or how to perform surgery. We assume that if we are the smartest person in the room, if our technical IQ is off the charts, success is inevitable. But Carnegie starts his thesis by shattering that illusion. He cites a study from the Carnegie Institute of Technology that reveals a success formula that is frankly terrifying if you've spent your whole life just studying textbooks. The study found that only 15% of a person's financial and professional success is due to technical knowledge. 15%. That's it. The other 85%? That comes from what Carnegie calls human engineering. It's your personality. It's your ability to lead. It's your capacity to arouse enthusiasm in other people. Think about that for a second. Think about the most brilliant engineer you know who is currently stuck in a mid-level position because nobody wants to work with them. Now think about that manager who maybe isn't the best coder, but who can rally a team to walk through fire to meet a deadline. That is the 85% in action. And the tragedy, the absolute tragedy that Carnegie identifies is that while this is the most critical skill for navigating life, it is the one subject that our traditional education system completely ignores. We are taught about the anatomy of a frog, but we aren't taught the anatomy of a conversation. Now, before you get cynical and think, okay, so this is a book about how to fake it, how to smile and schmooze your way to the top, I want to stop you right there. This is where the modern perspective, particularly the insights from the Vietnamese introduction by First News, becomes so vital. They argue that Dac Nan Tom isn't about superficial pleasing. It's about character formation. It's about a concept they call heart, vision, and talent. If you apply these principles just to get something out of someone, you are a manipulator, and you will eventually be found out. But if you apply them because you genuinely want to build a win-win scenario, where you help someone else grow while you grow yourself, then you are practicing high-level human leadership. This isn't a bag of tricks, it's a way of life. It's about aligning your internal values with your external behavior. So, where did this Bible of social interaction come from? It wasn't written overnight. Carnegie didn't just wake up one morning with a list of rules. This book is the result of a 15-year research project. It's a scientific inquiry into the nature of success. Carnegie realized his adult students in New York didn't just need public speaking tips, they were terrified of social friction. They didn't know how to handle an angry customer or a disappointed spouse. Because there were no textbooks on the subject, Carnegie had to build one. He hired a researcher who spent a year and a half just digging through libraries. They read everything. And I mean everything. They read the biographies of Julius Caesar to see how he handled his legions. They read over 100 books on Theodore Roosevelt alone to understand how he managed his cabinet. Carnegie personally interviewed the giants of his day, people like Marconi and Franklin D. Roosevelt, asking them, "How do you do it? How do you handle people?" But the real laboratory wasn't the library. It was Carnegie's classroom. This is what makes the book so visceral. He would teach a principle, and then he would tell his students, "Go out into the city of New York this week and try it. Use it on your boss, use it on your doorman, use it on your wife. Then come back and tell us what happened." The stories in this book are field reports from the front lines of human interaction. We hear about a manager of 314 employees who was a tyrant of criticism. He was creating a toxic environment where everyone was an opponent. He applied these principles, shifted from criticism to encouragement, and suddenly, the opponents became friends. Even the security guards started greeting him. That's not just a nice story, that is a fundamental shift in the culture of a workplace, driven by one person changing their approach. Carnegie quotes the philosopher Herbert Spencer, who said, "The great aim of education is not knowledge but action." And that brings us to the instruction manual portion of our discussion. How do you actually read a book like this? Most of us read a book once, nod our heads, say, "That was interesting," and put it on the shelf. Then we go right back to our old habits. Carnegie warns us, if you do that, you are wasting your time. To master human engineering, you are fighting against your own nature. You are fighting against a lifetime of reflex. He suggests a method that is almost like a game, but a high-stakes one. First, you have to read each chapter twice. You have to treat the book as a working document, underline it, write in the margins. But here's my favorite part. He suggests gamifying your self-improvement. He talks about a system where you ask a friend or a family member to fine you every time they catch you violating a principle. Imagine that. Imagine telling your spouse, "Every time I criticize you or complain this week, I owe you $1. Do you realize how quickly you would become aware of your own behavior? It forces mindfulness. Carnegie tells the story of a Wall Street banker who had a secret ritual. Every Saturday night, he would lock himself in his study for a self-audit. He would look at his calendar and replay every interview, every discussion, every meeting from the past week. And he would ask himself ruthless questions. What mistake did I make here? Was I right? Was I wrong? Could I have been kinder? Did I listen? He admitted that in the beginning, these sessions were painful. He was horrified by his own blunders. But over the years, the mistakes became fewer. His intuition sharpened. He became a master of people, not because he was born that way, but because he had the humility to audit his own performance. Now, let's pivot to the meat of the matter. The first major principle. If you take nothing else away from this podcast, take this image. If you want to gather honey, don't kick over the beehive. We are talking about criticism. The urge to condemn. The urge to say, "You're wrong, and here is why." Carnegie's argument is radical in its simplicity. Criticism is futile. It is a waste of energy. Why? Because 99 times out of 100, people do not criticize themselves for anything, no matter how wrong they may be. When you criticize someone, you aren't correcting them, you are forcing them to defend themselves. You are wounding their pride. And when you wound a person's pride, they don't learn, they just resent you. Let's look at the extreme end of the spectrum to prove this point. Carnegie takes us into the mind of the criminal. He tells the story of Two Gun Crowley. This was a man who, in 1931, was trapped in a shootout with the police. He was a cop killer, a violent, dangerous man. While the police were firing into his apartment, Crowley wrote a letter. And what did he write? Did he write, "I am a monster, I deserve to die"? No. He wrote, "Under my coat is a weary heart, but a kind one that would do nobody any harm." A few weeks later, he went to the electric chair. His last words weren't, "I'm sorry for killing people." His last words were, "This is what I get for defending myself." Here is the chilling realization: if Al Capone, if Two-Gun Crowley, if the men in Sing Sing prison don't blame themselves for their crimes, if they can rationalize murder, what makes you think the people in your life are going to accept your criticism about the dishes, or the quarterly report, or their driving? Human nature is a mechanism of self-justification. B.F. Skinner, the famous psychologist, proved this in the lab. Animals rewarded for good behavior learn rapidly. Animals punished for bad behavior learn slowly and develop strange side effects. The same applies to humans. We crave approval and we dread condemnation. One of the most powerful examples Carnegie gives is about Abraham Lincoln. We think of Lincoln as this stoic, gentle giant. But as a young man, he was a troll. He wrote mocking letters. He ridiculed people. In 1842, he ridiculed a politician named James Shields so badly that Shields challenged him to a duel. Can you imagine? The future president of the United States facing off in a field with broadswords, which was the weapon of choice, ready to kill or be killed. All because of a sarcastic letter. The duel was stopped at the last minute, but it shook Lincoln to his core. He realized that his criticism almost cost him his life. From that day forward, he almost never criticized anyone. During the Civil War, when his generals were failing him, when General Meade failed to pursue Lee after Gettysburg, essentially prolonging the war, Lincoln wrote a letter. It was a harsh letter. But he never sent it. It was found in his papers after he died. He realized that from the safety of the White House, it was easy to judge. But if he had been on the battlefield, seeing the blood and the horror, maybe he wouldn't have been so eager to attack either. He learned the power of the pause. Let's bring this into the modern day, or at least, the era of aviation. There is a story about Bob Hoover, a famous stunt pilot. He was flying a vintage prop plane when both engines cut out. He managed to land, saving the plane and himself, but it was a close call. He checked the fuel tanks and realized the mechanic had put jet fuel in a propeller plane. It ruined the engines. It could have killed him. Now, imagine the scene. The pilot walks back to the hangar. There is the mechanic, young, terrified, weeping, knowing he almost killed a legend. What would you do? Scream? Fire him? Sue him? Bob Hoover walked up to him, put his arm around his shoulder, and said, "To show you I'm sure that you'll never do this again, I want you to service my F-51 tomorrow." That is leadership. That is human engineering. By forgiving instead of condemning, he created a loyalty that money cannot buy. He didn't kick the beehive, he calmed the bees. So, if we aren't supposed to criticize, what are we supposed to do? How do we actually get people to do what we want? This leads us to the second major principle, or what Carnegie calls the big secret of dealing with people. There's only one way under the sun to get anybody to do anything. Have you ever thought about that? You can put a gun to someone's head, and they will give you their wallet. You can threaten to fire an employee, and they will show up on time, for a while. But those are crude methods with toxic fallout. The only way to get someone to do something willingly is to make them want to do it. And how do you make them want to do it? You have to give them what they crave. And I use the word crave deliberately. Sigmund Freud said the two primary drivers of human behavior are the sex urge and the desire to be great. John Dewey, the American philosopher, said the deepest urge in human nature is the desire to be important. William James said it is a craving to be appreciated. It is a gnawing, spiritual hunger. We feed our children food to keep their bodies alive, but how often do we feed their self-esteem? We starve the people around us of the one thing they desire more than anything else, the feeling of importance. Why do you think people wear expensive clothes? Why do we drive cars we can't afford? Why do we brag about our children? Why did George Washington want to be called His Mightiness? Why did a grocery clerk named Abraham Lincoln study law books at the bottom of a barrel by candlelight? It wasn't for the money. It was for the feeling of importance. Carnegie even suggests that some people go insane, literally losing their minds, because in their insanity, they can find the feeling of importance that the real world denied them. They retreat into a fantasy where they are queens or millionaires. If people are willing to lose their minds to feel important, imagine what you can achieve if you can give them that feeling while they are still sane. This brings us to Charles Schwab. Now, in the early 20th century, Charles Schwab was one of the very first people in America to be paid a salary of over $1 million a year. That is an astronomical amount of money for that time. Why was he paid that much? Was he the best steel manufacturer? No. Schwab admitted that many of the men working under him knew more about steel than he did. He was paid $1 million a year for one reason: his ability to deal with people. And what was his secret? He said, "I consider my ability to arouse enthusiasm among my people the greatest asset I possess." He had a simple rule: be hearty in your approbation and lavish in your praise. When he liked something, he was vocal about it. When he disliked something, he didn't criticize, he just focused on what was done right. He believed that there is nothing that kills the ambitions of a person as quickly as criticism from a superior. Think about the difference between flattery and appreciation. This is a crucial distinction that the book makes, and one that the Vietnamese edition emphasizes heavily. Flattery is cheap. It is insincere. It comes from the teeth out. Appreciation comes from the heart out. Flattery is telling a person what they think of themselves. Appreciation is noticing something specific, something real, and valuing it. If you try to use flattery, you will fail. It's like counterfeit money: eventually, someone will catch you passing it. But if you take the time to actually look at a person, to see the work they are doing, to understand the burden they are carrying, and you offer a sincere word of praise, that is magic. Carnegie tells a heartbreaking story at the end of this section called Father Forgets. It's a short essay by W. Livingston Larned. It describes a father standing by his sleeping son's bed. The father is overcome with remorse. He realizes that all day long, he had been snapping at the boy. Stand up straight. You didn't brush your teeth. You spilled your food. The father realizes he was measuring his young son by the yardstick of his own adulthood. He was expecting perfection. But looking at the sleeping boy, he sees the innocence, the love, the vulnerability. He realizes that his criticism was slowly crushing the boy's spirit. He vows, in that dark room, to change. To stop being a critic and start being a father. That is the essence of this first chunk of the book. It is a call to wake up. We are walking through a world of people who are desperate for validation. Your spouse, your children, your employees, the barista who makes your coffee, they are all fighting a hard battle. They all have a weary heart, like Two Gun Crowley, or a hunger for importance like Lincoln. The science is clear: criticism shuts people down. It triggers defensive walls. Appreciation opens them up. It unlocks that latent power that William James talked about. So, here is your challenge. We aren't just listening to a podcast, we are doing human engineering. For the next 24 hours, I want you to try an experiment. I want you to suppress the urge to criticize, no matter how justified you feel. If someone cuts you off in traffic, let it go. If your partner forgets to take out the trash, don't make a snide comment. Instead, I want you to find 3 opportunities to offer sincere, specific appreciation. Not, "Good job," but, I really appreciated how you handled that phone call, you were so patient. Or, thank you for making dinner, the sauce was incredible. Watch what happens. Watch the light come into their eyes. Watch the tension leave their shoulders. You aren't just being nice. You are tapping into the 85% of success. You are winning friends. You are influencing people. But more importantly, you are becoming the kind of person who brings light into a room rather than darkness. This is just the beginning. We have only scratched the surface of the first 25 pages or so. As we go deeper into this book, we are going to learn how to make people like you instantly, how to win people to your way of thinking, and how to change people without giving offense. But it all starts here. It starts with the decision to stop kicking the beehive and start satisfying the hunger for importance. Thank you for listening. Go out there and be an engineer of the human heart. I'll see you in the next episode.